Welcome to Tuesdays with BOA. This is a collaboration between Writers and Books and BOA Editions. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs at Writers and Books. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is taking care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. For our full upcoming schedule, you can check out wab.org. We're so excited to have Kendra DeColo with us this evening. First, we'll hear from Kendra, then she'll be in conversation with BOA Editions publisher and executive director, Peter Connors. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're out there. Feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function. Kendra's book is out today and available through our bookstore, Ampersand Books. I'll put the link in the chat. In poems that interrogate patriarchal narratives about childbirth, postpartum healing, and motherhood, Kendra DeColo's "I am not trying to hide my hungers from the world" revitalizes the way we look at mothering, pushing its boundaries and reclaiming one's spirit of defiance, abundance, and irreverent joy. Kendra DeColo is the author of 3 poetry collections, including My Dinner with Ron Jeremy and Thieves in the Afterlife, selected by Yusuf Kumanyaka for the 2013 Saturnalia Books Poetry Prize. Her poems and essays have appeared in American Poetry Review, Tin House, Waxwing, Los Angeles Review, Bitch Magazine, Vita, and elsewhere. A recipient of the 2019 Poetry Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, she has taught creative writing at Sarah Lawrence College and Vanderbilt University. She lives in Nashville, Tennessee. Kendra, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Ampersand Books, to Writers and Books, and thank you to Peter Connors, who we're going to be talking with in a little bit, for making this dream come true. BOA has always been one of those presses that I've idolized. I read Lee Young Lee when I was 18 years old. And then throughout these decades, it's all of the BOA authors have become kind of like family. And now it's amazing to finally be press family. So thank you. And then thank you all for being here. I see some names that I recognize. And so many of you have been part of this book's journey. I talk a lot about how I wrote this book when my daughter was very small. It wasn't easy, and there was a huge support system. And so many of you, whether you were physically near or just writing notes on social media and engaging with the work, really pushed me. It's not easy to write as a full-time parent. I know a lot of you guys know. So this feels really exciting. I'm just so excited to celebrate this book, and I'm going to start reading. I write poems about motherhood. Tonight, I can write the most motherly lines. For example, it's true, my asshole will never be the same after giving birth. Not its shape, but its soul, small wick of shadow I once called home and dream. Tonight, I can write how it burned like a votive, the whole inverted star, a series of grievances from which another self grew. Seance and seam, split off to live parallel lives like vaporish twins. I can write that I gave birth and died and came back to life, and my asshole will never be the same. It wore a haunted look those first few weeks, claimed it needed to take fresh airs in the country, wore aggressively Victorian clothes, strutted around naming geodes like a gentleman farmer. Shut up, asshole, I admonished. Tonight I write my daughter emerged and split me into 2 selves. It did not hurt the way they said it would. I rocked on my knees, singing a song like hurtling my voice off a cliff. My husband's hands disappeared into mine, and for a moment I left this world, a hem of blood between us. I broke onto the shore of a fixed note. I helixed and drank the urine of starved apparitions to keep me afloat, slapped the shit out of my reflection, squatted and squeezed a rocky planet out from the blue horizon like a ship bifurcating a labial sky. But my asshole, to whom I must now give credit where credit is due, taught me how to anchor to the earth, locate the hot center, which I always knew was there, but never saw shining in my sacrum like Orion's belt, when they stitched me shut in a ragged, casual way, even though I wished to stay open a little longer, unhinged and full of silences. Tonight, I can write that I would give birth 1,000,000 times over and not tell anyone about it if I could feel that kind of way again. One hollowed self open wide, enough to swallow my own body, then spit it back out onto the earth. So that was one of the first poems that I wrote for this collection, and it was inspired by a tweet, actually, by a kind of well-known editor at the time, who sent out this message on Twitter asking why mothers weren't submitting work about motherhood, which I don't know, I would love to see in chat. If we were at a reading, I would be hearing groans in the audience. But yeah, there were like internal groans happening. And it felt like very necessary to write a poem about motherhood that was going to upturn everything that an editor like that would assume motherhood was. So that's where this poem came from. I'm thinking about the movie Con Air. And if we were in a live, I guess I can still ask you guys, are there any Nick Cage fans out there? You can put it in the chat. Any fans of Con Air? I'd also love to hear what your comfort movies are, because this is definitely mine. I'm thinking about the movie Con Air. I'm thinking about the movie Con Air and my love for Nicolas Cage, which is profound and focused on the abundance of his hair, the way it trickles and recedes to the middle of his scalp, chorusing down his back with an unevenness that mirrors the body's swollen inadequacies. One of my breasts whistling with milk, while the other sleeps flat against my chest. The asymmetrical splendor, a speaker swelling with fuzz and odd time signatures, like half of my body restored to its original form. I never met Nicolas Cage, but watched Con Air so many times, I can conjure the chiaroscuro dribble of his voice, blue smoke lapping the edge of an extinguished star, and imagine he too knows how to disguise the body into something less fragile. The tired meat of his heart striated into 1,000 directions like a smoldering compass. As when I gave birth, and the midwives praised my composure, said their last patient clawed the bed like a raccoon. And I wished instead to have given birth like a squid, shooting an ombrade cage of ink and ovum out of her orifice. Because didn't I hold my daughter and wish to be as feral as a raccoon? Who knows love is the blunt metronome of rummaging through trash, who doesn't think but throws her body into the labor of it. In the last scene, Nicolas Cage grips the pink bunny he bought from commissary, ripped up and dripping with fuel, and hands it to his daughter anyway. And I will watch it over again to see him stand there bruised and lit with the one good thing he has, my left breast emptied, while the other floods with music, soothing the vowel-starred tongue. I hope Hillary is having good sex. I hope Hillary is having good sex, I say to myself at the farmer's market, while fingering the over-ripened bustier of an heirloom tomato. So close to rot, it nearly sucks my pinky into its dappled maw. I hope she's at least getting decent head, I say again, now that she's proven a woman can win the popular vote and still lose to an imbecile because sexism, because Russian interference, because my grandmother who worked for LBJ and then Nixon and was harassed by male coworkers until she had to quit, even she said of Hillary, "There's something about that woman I just don't trust." I hope Hillary is getting it in by Bill or someone better at listening, who asks her what she needs, then gets directly down to business without preamble or pussyfooting. Someone who emerges only for a sandwich or a breath of fresh air. I hope she has multiple side pieces, each a different build and scent. And when they ask to see her closet full of immaculate suits, organized and shimmering on their racks, like a god's molten skin, she lets them touch just the hem. Thinking about whether to say anything about that poem, except that Hillary is complicated. But yeah, a lot of those poems were written around, 2018, 2017. Thinking about how I never say the word cunt. Does anyone out there, is that anyone's expletive of choice? Thinking about how I never say the word cunt. Even though it fits on the tongue like a penny or compressed tab of Diet Coke. Even though it is the kryptonite of syphilitic dictators, but never fiendish poets or burnt out actors. Calloused invective of the heart, stammering like a fleet of frat boys' loafered hooves. Thinking of Richard Burton, who described Elizabeth Taylor's asshole with such tenderness, as if it were an injured fawn, tended to it when it became infected, enchanted by its geography and hymns, and learned to call it by its 1,000 balmy names, but never once uttered a syllable about her immaculate cunt, as in Dream Thief, spell to protect what I love, as in tick I will acquire when I'm old and tired of holding the demons in. I will stutter cunt, cunt, cunt on the bright carriage of my unraveling. The word a sip, infusion, safety valve, a reckoning, palm of nickels clicked into a payphone, mouthful of smoke blistering the air. When I first wrote this poem, I actually used an Araceli Grimay quote as an epigraph, which is from The Black Maria, which is one of my favorite books, also published on BOA. And it was a book that I kind of held close while I was working on I'm Not Trying to Hide My Hungers from the World, especially her poems that fuse politics and mothering. And there's this beautiful line about how someone who doesn't love you right can't name you right. And I thought about how the words for women's anatomy have just been not used with love, and how even the word cunt, if said with love, can be a beautiful word. So kind of a way of reclaiming it. It was also inspired by this kind of salacious tell-all book about Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor that came out. And I remember seeing this letter that Richard Burton had written to Elizabeth Taylor, just enamored with her asshole. And he talked about how he tended to it when it was infected. And I was like, God, that's real love. Okay. I don't think Neruda was thinking of my tampon. I don't think Neruda was thinking of my tampon when he wrote Body of a Woman, how it bloats and swells with urine every time I pee, or the Diva cup I consider buying in the health food store, while Paganini's first concerto for violin pierces through my earbuds with arpeggios I first heard on the car radio when I was 17, and the music inked into me its gauzy ambition. I choose size 2 for women over 30 who've given birth, which is a polite way of saying loose. But tonight I'm feeling romantic, thoughtfully tearing into a package of cherry pie in my parked Subaru. And I imagine what it might feel like to be rendered under the glow of the Citgo sign, which is so much like the moon, I can't tell the difference. There was the lover who said my body was as good as Drew Barrymore's, another who said I was better looking naked than he predicted, and another who said I looked like a child and a prostitute combined, the one who hissed I was so beautiful it made him want to hurt me. Is this what you meant, Neruda, when you wrote you stretch out like the world? The jetty of curls that thickens with blood on the last day of my period? Did you mean the shimmer and molt, the near-death stink of a movie theater's overflowing dark as the credits unfurl, and entrails of crushed candy scribble over the plush carpet, or a banquet hall flashing with half-filled bingo cards, or the IHOP sign off Storrow Drive flashing like a church marquee, announcing I'm almost home? Did you mean rows of Slim Jims gleaming in their packages of synthetic skin? A beard of neon dust sprawling across my chin, hunched in the dark of a gas station bathroom, where the attendant keeps vanilla-scented air freshener plugged into the wall. Could you have imagined me pulling a cup of blood from my body? And if so, was there a word you felt, and was it envy? So, Neruda was one of my first loves. And my relationship to his work has changed over the decades. And it's almost like he's become, this father figure who I've had to dethrone. And so there's some poems in this book that really wrestle with his legacy, his very fraught legacy, and also, just the way that his work is just a part of me. But Body of a Woman is one of the earliest poems I read of his when I was in high school. And just thinking about the way looking at a woman's body through the eyes of a male poet, how that informed me, and how good it feels to kind of take it back, to take that gaze back. Another period poem. I don't like to have sex while I'm on my period. Even though my husband is the kind of guy who isn't afraid of a woman's fluids, who might even go down if the flow is light, a real man, you might say, if that logic wasn't steeped in toxic masculinity, the way the sheets are steeped in blood after making love on day 3, the rasp of stain beneath us like a bat fluttering its wings in a puddle of Robitussin. I can't help but think it's crude to put down a towel before we begin. The way a man sticks a gloved finger up his wife's vagina to assess if she's done bleeding. Clean, you might say. If that language wasn't steeped in violent misogyny, because isn't my blood the cleanest part about me? Fuck a towel. If you want to go deep, you better be willing to draw blood. My husband is a real man, isn't afraid to smell the shed lining, muffle his face in the spasm of cells, wasn't afraid to watch our daughter emerge and split me open, crowning, which means my body concussed around her like a crown, which means there was so much blood I had to touch it to remember where I came from. The hot and pulsing corona, ruckus of DNA, metallic and stinging. Love, forgive me. I do not want to be touched while my body orchestrates this unraveling. As much as I love the bouquet of clots riding around the base of you, bright as a truck stop souvenir. To own a part of you where the blood remains dried and hissing, a dwelling of dank perfume. As the body travels back to its source, and I am answerable to no one, not even my own name. And I just have one more poem, maybe 2 more poems, depending on time. One more poem. Thank you all for listening. This feels really great to be sharing this with you all. Thank you. I am not trying to hide my hungers from the world anymore. Not trying to wipe the smears of gold from my chin. Not trying to erase the decadence of seeds and profanity, of grease. Not trying to pretend I don't open my mouth around the zaftig pearls of rain in the middle of the night, or that I don't love the moment right before sleep, when I'm most tender and translucent, my bladder half filled, knowing I will have to get up and pee, knowing my daughter will wake up before I am ready. The way I became aware of her on a climb through the mountains, a heaviness in my limbs, a gentle premonition, as I walked later to the Rite Aid, and I knew in my hands, and I knew in my mouth, and I knew in the way my body pulled me forward as I wept with joy, but also grief, that a part of my life was ending. And isn't it good to know when life is about to swallow you whole, take you in its arms and say, live, bitch, live, and you believe it. And this is how I will carry her from her crib and open the curtains part way, not ready to let the world in, the trails of smoke and exhaust winter blue as Cat Stevens' Mona Bone Jackin, spinning on the Crosley, that opens like an old suitcase where my daughter stands on a chair lifting the stylus from its perch, guiding it to the starry chatter that hisses between songs, wondering what will play next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kendra. That was so beautiful to hear. And it reminded me too of, I have such a special place in my heart for that Cat Stevens album, Mona Bone Jackin.
Yes.
I love that. And I go back to it all the time. And I remember first reading that in your manuscript and then just having the sense of inevitability. I'm like, I can't believe somebody referenced that album.
Yay. Oh, it's so good. Yes. I love that.
So I'd love to, it's interesting. Craig Morgan Teicher was at Tuesdays with BOA last week, and we got pretty into the idea of fatherhood in poems and the role that fatherhood plays. So I loved your comments to start with about, the idea of like mother poems. And as you were reading, I started to think too of like the way that different BOA poets have addressed motherhood. So I made this like quick list of like Araceli's herself and Lucille Clifton, of course, but Catherine Nurenberger, Ketcher Kuipers, Erica Meitner. We have a book coming up by Camille Guthrie called Diamonds that it really gets in depth into motherhood and single motherhood. So I'm curious, if you could just maybe say a little bit more about like what that image of a mother poem is as opposed to what it could be, and maybe perhaps some poets who write about motherhood in ways that you admire or use as models or go back to.
I mean, so many models and so many BOA authors who are models. But I was thinking even some of, the earlier, because I think that so much has changed, especially the permission that women have in general to write about things that I feel like were not considered publishable for so long. And motherhood being one of those kind of like frumpy, what is it? What some French author called it, like the damp precincts of mother, like this like dampness of milk stains and just this kind of general disdain for it. And so much of that has changed. But some of the earliest poets I read writing about motherhood were Lucille Clifton, Kim Adonisio, I feel like has been such a huge influence in her writing the erotic, but also in the way that she can write so tenderly about her daughter and also incorporate this ferocity. I love reading poems about motherhood that have that element of danger that really try and dethrone this concept of motherhood as being this pristine role that you have to earn, or rather, certain women are just white women in our society are automatically given, white rich women given this role as mothers is guaranteed, whereas other women, it's something that you're trying to prove. Oh, I'm a good mother. I'm a good mother. And I see that happening in the poetry world, this pressure. Oh, if I'm going to write about motherhood, I have to make myself seem like a good mother because it's fucking scary to show yourself as an imperfect mother, because you can actually, there are consequences for that in the world. But I think so I noticed that playing out in writing as much as it does in the real world. So when I became a mother, I think my barrier, my journey was letting myself write about it without the fear of being boring. I think that was my biggest concern, that people would think it was boring, that no one wants to hear it. So calling on writers like Kim Adonisio, Lucille Clifton, Camille Dungy, Erica Meitner, and women who are writing about it through different lenses, and just really unapologetically have been, really influential.
I was also, going through the book today, thinking of different like questions and things to talk about, and I kept like revisiting and chuckling over so many of the titles of these poems. And you read some of them, but let's see what. Well, I Pump Milk Like a Boss, first of all, but I mean, the poem that gives no fucks. I mean, one after another, they're just there's such humor in the poems themselves and even the titles. And I know that you have performed at comedy clubs. Yes. You performed at lots of places, including, which is very cool to me, the Newport Folk Festival, which I'm curious about. But what role does humor play in your work? And whether it's like that initial draft or going back over it.
Right. Well, I always think of the punchline as kind of like the original aphorism, or it's like so connected to that form for me. And Rodney Dangerfield was a big influence when I was working on my first book, especially, and I have a bunch of odes to Rodney in my first, and just using his one-liners as epigraphs just worked really beautifully. But yeah, comedy really has, and I know it's Kathy Park Hong, am I saying Kathy? Minor Feelings author. She has an essay about Richard Pryor that's incredible. I was actually just revisiting. So many poets I feel like are informed by stand-up comedy. And I feel because it's doing similar work, it's raising the stakes so that you can have this emotional response. And I think I've learned so much about craft from studying the way you raise those stakes. Like how do you make the audience feel safe? How do you build that tension? And then how do you kind of release it or not? And so actually a few years ago, I became friends. I was in a political moms group with this stand-up comedian in Nashville. And so she started inviting me to shows, and I would perform alongside these amazing stand-up comedians. And then one night I tried my own material and bombed. It was horrible. But that too was a really good teacher. But it was like, workshopping in the moment. And so that's also been really valuable.
Did you read poems there?
And I did read poems. Yeah, I read the Eat a Dick poem. That's kind of like one of the first places I read that poem.
Yeah.
It was, the kind of the perfect audience for it.
I would like to tell the president to eat a dick in a non-homophobic way.
Yes.
I think the third poem in the book.
Yes.
And how about, I'm curious about like sound and speaking, because we're talking about performance and so forth. Is speaking the poems out loud part of your writing process as well? Do you listen to the way that they sound out loud when you're writing?
Yeah, and I think that was really great advice I was given early on, that a big part of revision should be reading your work aloud. Just, in terms of hearing the rhythms of it, finding where you stumble, finding the places where where you yourself are not connecting. Because I love the idea that poetry lives in the body. And if you're reading something and you find, and if I'm dissociating while I'm reading something I've written, I think that's a sign to edit that line or change, or, to go deeper. And my father is a musician. I think he might be here watching tonight. And so I listened to him practicing every night and playing kind of 5 notes the same way for an hour, and then playing them like slightest variations. And I think that kind of tuned my ear to think about just really the sounds of simple words and really like reveling in it. And so when I'm getting ready to work on a new poem, if I haven't written in a while, I'll just make a list of words that just feel good to say, and just kind of hold those syllables in me, and then see where that music leads to.
That's awesome. And of course, among other things, your book was made into BOA's very first audiobook.
Yes.
Which was a really exciting development for all of us. And you did such a fantastic job with it. So if anybody out there has the book and wants to hear Kendra read the whole thing, there is now an official audiobook of it too that sounds beautiful. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that recording process, what that was like.
Yeah, there was kind of just the star power of being in this historical Nashville neighborhood where I've, written about how Johnny Cash recorded on the same street, and Willie Nelson and Hank Williams, all of these Nashville legends. So it was just like really cool, just getting to roll up with my poems and just like sit in this leather chair and this really super nice microphone. And I worked with the sound engineer, John Behrens, who was amazing and hilarious, but just really precise. And that was kind of one of the takeaways from one of the most amazing parts of that was just really like he listened to every single word to make sure that that word sounded, that it had integrity and that it sounded how it should, and that my pronunciation was correct, and just paying such a close attention to detail is like a poet's dream. So it's just like reveling in the language for a few hours. That was beautiful. And in preparation for it, I listened to a lot of audiobooks. So I listened to Jericho Brown. I listened to Ada Limon, who's both are amazing readers. I listened to Tracy K. Smith, kind of curious about pacing. Because I think the readings that I like to go to are when poets get animated and get really intense, and the intensity shows up in speed. But I didn't know if that was going to translate to an audiobook. So it was interesting to play with slowing it down and how intense, you can actually be more intense by being slower in a poem. And so that was fun.
You shared a little story about your grandmother too, reading poetry. Could you share that with us?
Yeah. When we first had that conversation about doing the audiobook, I I got emotional thinking about my grandmother, who passed away the week after you wrote me to tell me the book had been accepted. And she's just been kind of my champion my whole life, but especially with writing. But she worked in politics. I mentioned her in the Hillary poem, but she helped craft policy that would become the American Disabilities Act. And she specifically worked on vocational law and making things accessible, especially to people who are visually impaired. And then so later on in life, post-retirement, she would record the New York Times every weekend for a radio service for the visually impaired. And that was just always something she did that I admired so much. I thought was so beautiful. And she would get fan mail from people saying, you read so beautifully and so clearly. And so speaking clearly was always big to her. So this feels like this beautiful connection, and just kind of meditating on what it means to connect with a person through speaking something aloud and kind of carrying that legacy on felt really meaningful.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, there's a bunch of, different subjects that you cover in this book. And I'm always curious, like when a poet finishes one book, is there anything in here that you feel like, okay, I've had the final say that I'm going to have about this thing. I'm not going to write about this thing anymore? Or does it just open up more opportunities to say things differently about that thing?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I know. That's such a good question. Because I feel like our obsessions stay the same no matter what. And I think I'm going to be writing about the body and the erotic forever, even, and it'll be interesting to see how that changes. I have like multiple breakup letters to my clitoris in previous collections. So it's like, I keep thinking I'm done writing about my vagina, but clearly I'm not, which is, amazing. And I do feel, I hear people talk about, or Tracy Brimhall has talked about writing this breakup poem when you finish a book. And the poem is like the final say poem. And it did feel like that when I wrote, I'm not trying to hide my hungers from the world anymore. Like that poem really felt at least like the end of what I had to say about early childhood with my daughter, those first few years that are really beautiful and really hard. So, this, luckily as a parent, it's always changing and you're growing with your child. So I'm kind of excited to see what comes up next.
Me too. I can't wait. Well, thank you so much, Kendra, for being here with us tonight. It's been so great hearing you read the poems and just getting to chat a little bit. I am going to bail out, and if you would read one more poem for us before signing off, I would appreciate it. But thanks again for being here. Congratulations on this beautiful book, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much, Peter. Bye. All right. I'll close us out with the first poem of the collection. I pump milk like a boss. I pump milk on the side of the road where the grass is biblical green, as if first cousin to the cow, her pink and swollen tits immaculate as the plumbing of a church organ sending up calls to God. Brassy mesh of notes, fermented and dank as kush. I pump milk with my bare hands into a bar's bathroom sink, above which is a mirror where someone scrawled, I love cricket pussy, and below that, everyone deserves to be loved. I look at myself under the fingered smudge, the bodily fluid spattered like haikus, and I pump as if my milk is propaganda. Fingers bowing across my chest like a pawn shop violin, milky graffiti tagging the spit-clogged drain. I pump like I'm writing my name in blood, which turns to the milk my child sucks dry, which she turns into blood. I pump like I have a tattoo on my pudenda that says Aerosmith backwards. I pump as if my hands have teeth, one combat boot hitched up on the toilet seat, each hiss of milk chanting like a choir. Yes, bitch, yes. My tits bitten and salt-veined, as when my baby took her first gulp of air, humming from the engorged crevasse of me like a herd of wildebeest, as if the hive of me could have burst, the infrared honey, the glop glop of afterbirth dripping down my left leg, spittle and amen, amniotic residue fluorescent with prayer. Do men lactate as a popular Google search? And I wonder what would happen if they could. Our presidents lifting their offspring to their breasts in the deep pockets of night, listening to the dribble of milk sipped from the pulpit of their bodies. Tonight, my breasts became so engorged, I said I'd pay someone to suck my tits, half joking. But a woman who heard followed me to the bathroom, read me a sex poem while I pumped my milk, leaning away from the need in her voice. And the milk came slow, and I pumped and waited for her to finish. And a streetlight scribbled in the parking lot. And I know there's a price we pay for loneliness and a price we pay to forget it. And so I dedicate my libido to my younger self. And this is how I want to live. Milk-stained, a little bit emptied, a little bit in love with the abundance of my body, my milk pale yellow with a layer of cream, which I will save long after it's turned, praising its curdled glow. Every time I open the fridge, as if its presence is enough to keep me safe, as if it's enough to make me invincible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you to Peter Connors and everyone at BOA. You can catch up with previous readings, and eventually this reading will be online at our website, wab.org. So join us next week. We'll have Rachel Mennies for Tuesdays with BOA, and thank you and have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.